Hello, and welcome back to our ASEG Presents series on supply chain. Today is session 2. I'm David Wascom. I'm part of the leadership team here at ASEG, and it is my pleasure to continue moderating this series. Now, in session 1, Martin Rowan, the managing partner at Reveal, and I had a great conversation about the state of supply chain. It was an opportunity for us to explore what Martin and his team are seeing, how customers are managing through the challenges and opportunities we're all facing given today's interesting times. We talked about customers looking at their SAP investment as an asset and really working to sweat that asset to deliver the most value in managing and optimizing their supply chain performance. Now, if you did not have a chance to catch that conversation when it first aired, no problem. It's available on demand for ASEG members on aseg.com. Now, today, we'll be joined by Christy Bain, Associate Partner and Advisor at Reveal. Christy will be taking us on a deeper dive around using your SAP system as an asset to drive manufacturing and operational excellence. Again, like session 1, Christy's presentation is pre-recorded, but also like session 1, Christy's available live today in the chat. Please take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions, get clarity, and have your voice heard as we learn how to get the most from our SAP technology investment. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Christy.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today. This is a follow-on to the conversation between David and Martin Rowan. They did a little bit of a town hall style interview walking through SAP as an asset and kind of queuing us up for the following sessions. So if you haven't had a chance to go and take a look at that, take the time to do so. It was a really interesting chat, and specifically focusing on what we're all experiencing now in the post-COVID years and how we're progressing and taking next steps forward with SAP. So thank you very, very much for that intro. I have the pleasure today of continuing the conversation. We're going to talk about how we can use SAP as an asset to drive manufacturing and operational excellence, which is really what our goal is overall. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So we have some very specific outcomes and objectives today. We want to go through and understand the importance of our demand management program. And I'm going to explain exactly what the demand management program is made up of. And we're going to talk through some of the really key decisions we have to make in order to be able to get great outcomes from that demand management program. The second thing that we're going to talk about is making sure that we are using one single system of record or source of truth to manage our processes. We're going to talk a little bit about where that can lead into process integration breakdowns and how we can move away from that in order to be successful. We're also going to chat through the importance of capacity planning and scheduling, and I imagine that that is why most of you have joined today, is to understand a little bit about how this is going to drive production efficiency, help us to reduce materials shortages, and be able to overall increase our throughput. Lastly, we want to talk a little bit about the shop floor and why real-time information is so very important in our ability to be able to achieve operational efficiency. So we'll jump right into the agenda for today, and we're going to kick off with that conversation around recognizing and responding to demands. So demand is almost a dirty word right now. Many of us have been blessed with a lot of increased demand since the pandemic. Others have seen shifts in demand, and some have seen demand fall off. But no matter which scenario you fall into, there are some things that are really important in order to be able to set up for success in the production planning process. So it all comes down to the alignment of our business rules with our business behaviors. The closer that alignment, the more efficient we are, the less frustrating it is, and the smoother the flow of information and materials. So when we think about defining our demand program, there's some questions that we can start thinking through. And that is, first of all, how good are we at managing our demand? When we think about how we commit to our customer, there's a lot of key pieces that we need to consider that help us to make the right decision in terms of what planning strategy we should be using. So when we think about our customers, what is our customers' tolerance for lead time? How quickly do they expect a response or a confirmation? How critical is that confirmation date in terms of available to promise? And how flexible do we need to be in what it is that we are delivering? There's one master data field that really governs this, and it's called a planning strategy. And it tells us how we are going to react and respond to the demand signal that we are receiving. And getting this right allows our business rules and our behaviors to be in sync with one another. So when we think about it from the perspective of what our overall stocking and replenishment strategy looks like. Where do we want to hold our stock and why? What is the justification for that? What stage of the BOM are we going to be producing to? What signal do we want to use to replenish stock? So if we think about a planning strategy, what that's really telling us is how we're going to react and respond to that demand signal that we're receiving. And so when we go through and we categorize that, we have three major categories that it can fall into. And these are familiar to likely all of us in the audience. We have the concept of make to order, where we do not start anything until we receive that customer order in hand. Make to stock, where we're producing in advance of that demand signal to a forecast or at the point where we receive the customer order. And then assemble to order or finish to order, when we have late point product differentiation. Maybe we have a lot of variations on the end item, and we want to make sure that we are in a position to be able to turn that within the customer's tolerance for lead time. So for us, we may be using just one of these things. In fact, more often than not, when we go in and we speak with our clients, they are using just a couple of planning strategies. You're going to see here in the graphic is there are an awful lot of options. Almost any scenario we could think of, there is a planning strategy out there that meets that need. One of the things that's hardest about planning strategies is that we have to be really honest with how we're going to react and respond to the demand. So if we say we're make to order, but we actually are going ahead and placing purchase orders to have raw materials in place. Or we say that we are make to stock, but we try to figure out which of those demand signals is real and not real, and we make that decision on a case-by-case basis. Assemble to order, maybe we are planning to go through and produce up to a certain level of the BOM, but then we decide not to do that. We want to make sure that whichever of these flavors that we choose is correct and in line with what we are going to operationally execute. That's going to promote that harmony that we're looking for and really let SAP start to perform as an asset in terms of helping us to get the right product at the right time and manage our production process efficiently. So when we go through and we think about these things, one of the easiest ways to think about it is like a refrigerator. So if you've got kids at home, this is probably extra familiar to you in terms of your meal planning for the week. So man, oh man, I got to think through what it is I need to have on hand. Without coffee, there is not sanity, so I must have creamer. I need this all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and plan to stock this on hand. My eggs, I know I need to replenish every time I get down to 2. If I have less than 2 eggs, then I've got an unhappy kid in the morning. I have chilled white wine. When I have a big date with my significant other, I want to make sure I have this in place. But when I buy it, I get the good stuff. So I'm only buying it when I know I really am going to need it. And then lastly, that light bulb. I don't know when the last time that sucker went out, but I know I need to go ahead and purchase a replenishment when it actually happens. So that's more event driven. So make it all the time. Stock, reorder point, again, responding to that demand, planning to that demand. Chilled white wine, making that to order, and the light bulb being an event-driven as an unplanned purchase. So there are so many different strategies for us to utilize, and what we want to make sure is that we're thinking about each of our materials individually. In our next session, Sean is going to be taking us through how we optimize our inventory and how we think about our materials and group and prioritize them. And this would be one of the key master data principles that we want to think about as we think about how all of our different materials behave and what that demand signal looks like. Within our demand program, we have sales orders, we have stock transfer orders, we have forecasts, and any combination thereof. And the planning strategy really helps us to know how we're going to react and respond to that signal when it comes in. So what is it I'm going to do when I receive that information? And what we don't want is for people to have to suss through what is quote unquote real and what is not real in order to make decisions. The makeup of that demand program is really what's going to help us to figure out what our capacity picture looks like what our purchasing plans look like. One of the things that SAP brings to us is a lot of tools for exception monitoring. And for forecast performance, it is also there for us. So it helps us to understand if we're using the right kind of consumption strategy. We can go in and see what our forecast performance looks like. We can see if we are ahead or behind. And to have ahead or behind conditions be clear is really helpful to us from an operational standpoint. So as a planner, I really want to know how that forecast performance is going. And I want to make sure that I have the correct strategies in place to react and respond to that demand signal. So we can actually go in and see how we're performing. You'll see the red, yellow, and green lights down below as we map those customer orders, in this case in a make-to-stock environment, back to the forecast. So now that we understand a little bit about what our demand program looks like, now let's talk just a little bit about something that seems incredibly intuitive, like it's an absolute no-brainer, we should be doing it all the time, but it's the case for a single source of truth. Because the truth is, oftentimes, we are not using SAP as our single source of truth. And in order for it to really be able to perform as an asset, a true value add for us in our day-to-day lives rather than a record and report solution, we really need to start using it as a single source of truth. In David and Martin's chat, they were talking about walking into a meeting and feeling the whole number, who's got the number scenario, and that really resonated with me. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting where we've all come in with different pieces of information and debated whose information was correct. If everything's in one single source of truth, that becomes much easier. So you can see here, this is a little diagram of what the modern supply chain looks like. And as I'm paging through here, we're seeing material move from place to place. In order to make sure that material ends up in the right place, we know that we have to have an effective and efficient flow of information. Without that, we will never have an effective and efficient flow of material because the system is ill-informed and the proposals that it will produce for us will not be value added. So it has to be informed. It's like going to your aunt and asking for advice but only telling her a little piece of the story. Like, I really want her to tell me this is okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go out and spend money on a really excellent dinner, and there's maybe some other things I could or should be thinking about when I choose to do that. I only tell her part of the story so that I get the answer that I want. I want to make sure that our relationship with SAP is healthier than that, and we are getting truth from the system by informing it of all of our plans and information. So once we have the material in the right place, then we know that we have relevant material to be able to ship to our customers. And in order to be able to get that promising in place that we're looking for, the elusive available to promise, a confirmation date, a promise that we can keep, we have to be able to get that relevant information in the right place. And you'll see here it really starts to affect us. So highlighted in yellow are just a few pieces. So we want to avoid those service level disruptions. Those are really important. We want to be able to set those expectations in place, and we can do that if we've got a good flow of information happening. We want to be able to predictively plan our product availability and make sure that we know exactly when that is likely to be available. And that's not just to our customers, but this is a manufacturing talk, and we think about production planning and operational efficiency. That's also for us internally, right? We need to know exactly when that material is going to be available in order for us to plan and optimize our lines. If we don't have that information correct, we know that we're starting with a plan that's not relevant, realistic, or actionable. We want to make sure that that's what we're doing. So in order to be able to get those operational efficiencies in place, to strive for operational excellence, it really depends on being able to have that flow of relevant information. So if you look here at this poor lady, every time I look at this image, it really resonates with me. I definitely feel this. You work so hard to get a plan in place, and we think that everybody is on the same page. And what we don't know is that we all have our own thing going on. We've got commitments coming out of a meeting, but in fact, we are not all working from the same information. We've got a bunch of personal information systems, Excel sheets, and then I don't know about you, sometimes that Excel sheet's not quite doing it for me anymore. So now I've got access in place, and then When that's not working, then we add a little bit of SQL, and it's really a shame because we have this tool already at our fingertips, this asset that's just waiting to be utilized and deployed fully in SAP that is built on best practices that can actually help us with this work. But we don't know what we don't know, so sometimes it's really hard to get started. So this also turns into a lot of paperwork on the floor. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the value of real-time information and being able to keep folks on the same page and the importance of being able to share this information maybe deeper into our organization than what we do today. So it's not just a matter of, the managerial staff or the planners and buyers having this information. We want to actually carry this all the way down to the shop floor so that everybody is on the same page and we're accountable and responsible to the same plan. We're all trying to achieve the same goal and go to the same destination. So when we have these personal information systems, it really starts to disrupt the harmony, the integrated nature of the way that we're trying to work together. This leads us to this bottom statement here, which is we know that there's a problem, but where is it? And we can't find it. So we're going to chat through today a bunch of ways that SAP can actually help us to find our problems, understand where we have constraints, and help us go to the right place in order to figure out what is happening so that we can work to understand and resolve those constraints and bottlenecks in our processes, and actually help to also resolve any process integration breakdowns. It's super powerful, but when we're all working individually, it's really hard for us to be able to see that. Okay? So here's just kind of a classic end-to-end diagram, okay, that walks us through the process. So all the way from sales and operations planning or integrated business planning to that important step of S&OE, so making sure that what we're planning, we are in a position to execute, and then passing through to kind of where we started our conversation today, which is really around demand management. I'm now going to take us in and talk a little bit about MRP and the production planning process and how vitally important those are. But the major point here is that in supply chain, there's so little that we can do on our own, right? The hardest thing and the best thing about having a job in supply chain and working with a system like SAP is that it is fully integrated. So you have the power of that integration, of having all of that data and qualitative input from the cross-functional team at your fingertips, but you also have the challenge of needing to work together in order to do that. And that starts with setting out with our intention. So getting our plan in place, then going through the act of actually getting a schedule in place that is reasonable and realistic and actionable. And we're going to talk through specifically the capacity planning piece of that, the production planning piece of it in just a moment, and then how that actually carries through into execution. And the tighter the alignment of that plan, schedule, and actual, the less disruption and the lower cost to being able to move through the process. But the less disruptive it is, the more efficient and the more excellent we can be from an operational perspective. And, as the folks who are sitting in the seats and doing this work, that's vitally important to us in terms of our job satisfaction and what we can bring to the table. So now let's go ahead and move into delivering that plan that is reasonable, realistic, and actionable. So this is real right now. So, many of us are still in the thick of what I would call it a non-recovery recovery. So, things in many ways for many of us actually feel quite a lot worse than they may have even felt in the thick of the pandemic. And part of that is just the length of time that this has gone on, where we're trying to navigate these, these churning waters, where things have been, chaotic and crazy and unpredictable. But the bigger underlying thing here is that we start to feel a little bit like we're not in the driver's seat, and we don't have the ability to manage our own destination. And it's hard for us to tell if we've had a good day or a bad day, and we start to measure that in terms of effort rather than outcome. And I don't know if that resonates with some of you. I'd be interested to know that when we get to the end and we do a little more chatting. But this is, I think, a very, very real thing in terms of being able to have a good day and really be able to push your organization forward and help your team to navigate these choppy waters. So there's some things that we can do, and one of the key components that's often missing, and why a lot of us, I think, are joining the call today, are really around the production planning process. And within the production planning process, we need to be able to evaluate our capacity, and we need to be able to go in and level it. Our goal, our outcome of this process is being able to provide to our shop floor a schedule that is reasonable and realistic and actionable. And that means that we've done the due diligence up front, and we know that we have capacity available. Our materials are timed to be available when they need to be. We've got the tools and any additional equipment that's required in order to be able to put this through an effective and efficient manner. So this is that ounce of preventative pre-work that saves us, tons of extra rework once it actually gets over to the manufacturing floor. And if we think about running a relay and passing the baton from person to person, this is very much that linchpin in the process to make sure that we have an effective and efficient handoff. And I love the image of the speed bumps here, because we know that demand is slowing in, we're recognizing and we're responding to that demand, but taking a moment just to make sure that we are in a good position for success is so vitally important to this process. So one of the things that is going to help us to be able to do that with knowing if we have a good plan in place is this notion of exception management and housekeeping. So in order to start from a good place, our house has to be in order. So when Martin and David were talking about the business maturity continuum and they were rolling through the different stages, these are the pieces that really fall into stage 2 for data integrity and stage 3 for business rules. These are some of the prerequisites and then outcomes of being able to work through those pieces. So making sure that our system is fully informed, again, that advice that you're looking for here is meaning that we have to have everything up to date and current. So if SAP doesn't know that that thing was planned to come in yesterday is actually not getting here till next Wednesday, it's going to look like everything's hunky-dory. We're not going to get the exception message that we need. So we want to make sure that we are getting all the information in. We're not allowing ourselves to fall past due. And then once that has happened, we actually are going to start to get exception messages that are really meaningful and helpful to being able to work through the process. And for those of you who are joining the ATP and MRP session, 2 sessions from now, we're going to have in that talk a lot more conversation around the exception monitoring and housekeeping portion of things, because MRP has such an integral role in being able to be successful in ATP. But what I will draw your attention to is that our exceptions do fall into 2 categories. The first is process management, and that's going to help us to identify things like master data issues, breakdowns in our production planning process where things are not happening in the timely manner. We haven't gotten the schedule in place. We're past due to when we need to start. Demand is in a window that we're not able to respond to based on our normal rules, so there's an escalation process. And then also rebalancing, so if something has happened and we now need to make some movements in our schedule, it's going to help us to identify those issues as well. So super powerful tools for us as planners and buyers to be able to be successful. So what I want to roll through next is I want to take you through understanding a little bit more about the actual production planning process. And we're going to start here with being able to share information around our capacity planning. So understanding where we have available capacity and where we are over capacity is super important. We want to know not only what the current state is and if we're producing a plan that's achievable, but we also want to be in a position to be opportunistic and know when the next time is that we could take a customer order. So let's say very specifically, if we are beyond the make to stock environment and we are in an assemble to order or make to order environment, being able to provide information and feedback immediately on when we could place that next order in would be great. So our work centers give us or grant available capacity. Our planned orders, production orders, or process orders then consume that capacity. So it is a meeting of supply and demand and trying to be able to go in and balance through that process. So this is the evaluation process. And we go in and we evaluate to see where we need to focus on actually going through and leveling. The other thing, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in a moment, is that this actually also serves us as a dispatch list so that operationally we know what's coming next. That might help not only the specific work center where that work is going to be coming to for resource, but it will also help the folks who need to do the pre-planning. So for material staging, for being able to make sure tools are available, these are all really powerful tools to be able to help us to be able to do that. Okay? So the other thing that it will then allow us to do is actually really go down into the details to be able to get that finite schedule in place. And so we're going to actually go through and see how this ties into the graphical planning board, which allows us to be able to dispatch the work that we're seeing and create that finite constrained schedule that's realistic to what our capacity availability is. One of the things that's great about this tool is that we can get a daily view. So that's very granular, very focused on what is coming up in the next few hours, on the next shifts, being able to use for preparing for that day's work. We can also go further out and actually integrate this into our sales and operations planning or integrated business planning process and get a long-term view. We can also specifically focus on overloads. We can be proactive and manage by exception. And then we can get that lead time view. And here you'll see this lead time view, things are not looking so good. We don't have a good spot yet. We're over capacity all the way through. So that might prompt a good conversation around, okay, what is it that we need to do here? Because the situation is not looking to improve anytime in the near future. So it prompts us to be able to dialogue with one another, maybe bring that back into your execution sessions, be able to talk about that as an integrated team and see what your options are. Is there another work center we could utilize? Do we have the ability to go out to a subcontractor? What are our relief or release valves to be able to handle this? Or can we renegotiate in terms of what those promise dates look like for our customers? So super important. One of the most beautiful things I think as a tool and an asset in SAP is this graphical planning board. So being able to actually go in and really make sure that we have that reasonable and realistic plan. What's really great about this is going to update as information is coming in. We can go in and we can work across resources and rebalance them. We can optimize for setup. We can actually see what the impact would be if we have to insert an unexpected demand into the existing plan. So really wonderful tools to be able to put that schedule together. And then we can actually also have a graphical representation to be able to share out to some of the other groups in terms of being able to get that visual in place. But it becomes incredibly clear where there are overloads, what work has not yet been dispatched. You'll see that in the bottom portion of the screen, and then what is actually up there and on the board today. And this is great because we actually can configure this for different time buckets and different time horizons so we get the right level of detail so that the information is relevant to the planning process. And it's really going to help us in terms of making sure that we're getting the work to the right place at the right time. Okay? So this is so important when it comes to our material availability checking. So not only for the availability checking for our customer, but also to ensure that in that near-term horizon, we are staging material appropriately and we are prioritizing the use of constrained raw material. So let's say, for example, we're having to make some decisions on air freight or expediting. Making sure that we have these things in alignment is so important, and then having that right availability check to make sure that we're committing material to those orders at the right place at the right time. This is also helping us to be able to get those accurate delivery date quotes at a glance and making sure that we're sharing that information all the way through our process, because whatever it is that we are scheduling here on the graphical planning board, this is flowing all the way through to our stock requirements list. It's flowing through to the sales order ATP checking, depending on what our rule set is there. So very, very important to make sure that we are placing our time and our effort and our resources in the right place, on the manufacturing floor and in all of the supporting areas that allow that manufacturing floor to perform and to hum. So one of the things that we would be remiss in not mentioning is the importance of making sure that when we are sending orders out to the floor, that we actually have the material available. So this is back to that notion of reasonable, realistic, and actionable, and that smooth passing of the baton to make sure that we're setting everybody up for success, because that's how we're going to be operationally efficient. That's how we're going to be able to have faith and trust in the plan, and acceptance on the shop floor that this is something that they will be able to rely on and know that they can go forth and execute. And one of the things that we have in our arsenal is this missing parts report, to be able to look at this and go, okay, am I in a position to actually move forward with this order? Nope. Which things do I need to work on expediting? And then also, one of my favorite functions here is the collective availability check. So not only can I get that quick exception message of red or green, but I can actually go in here and see if I need to reprioritize. So when I have to make decisions, I can go in here and go, okay, wait a second. As a planner responsible for this, knowing and having conversations on prioritizing this demand, how do I make the best use of constrained material? How do we get the most value out of our time? And how does that relate operationally to how we can be efficient and effective in being able to get through the production process? So this is super effective in being able to go in and take a look at some of these things. Okay. All right. So insights that enable continuous operational improvement. I want to be able to get some reporting out of this. So in terms of shop floor control, there is a clear baton pass between our planners and then the folks who are out on the shop floor actually making it happen. So the planners are setting the plan in place. The shop floor is actually going through and moving the materials and producing the goods. So making sure that we've got a good baton pass. One of the things that I really want to highlight here is around making sure that we have efficient reporting of our material withdrawals and order confirmations, our goods receipts, and our other material movements. So critical for us to be able to draw insights out of the system. And one of the things that's really nice is that as we're going through the process and we're conducting those activities, the system's going to update for us in real time. So we can see if we are performing according to plan, and we can actually go through and see where we need to help or understand why we are behind or not able to execute if we're doing something out of order, if we've had a buildup or a slip in the schedule. So super important, effective in being able to navigate those waters. Once we have this in place and we're starting to get real-time information, now we've got something. Now we're cooking with gas. We've got information that we can do something with, and we can actually go down and start taking a look at our production orders. We could look at these not only from a ahead or behind conditions, but we can actually get some trends over time in terms of what our lead times realistically look like, how we're performing for plan versus schedule, plan versus actual, and schedule versus actual. Helps break down that process so we know exactly where we need to focus, and we start to actually get quality information. Now, for my folks that work in a repetitive environment, I'm so sorry. Not all of this reporting is available to you just to the nature of repetitive manufacturing, but for anybody who's working in process industries or in a discrete environment, these reports are available to you, so you're starting to collect that information very specifically down to the individual production order or process order. Reporting and schedule attainment, I like to refer to this as the candy cane report. The white shows what we had scheduled, so that was what we intended to do. So after we went through that process of evaluating materials, doing the capacity evaluation, the leveling, put together our very best schedule, then this is what actually happened once we got into execution. So these are the opportunities to have those conversations around what has gone well and maybe what needs a little bit more love. Super helpful. And then we can actually take this down and start to drive through some of the issues that we might be seeing. So are there deviations, and where are those deviations specifically occurring? So now we can look at those production orders. We can start to drill in and see where maybe we have a master data problem or where we have an actual execution problem. We know where we actually need to deploy folks to go out and actually see what is happening. Okay. Then we can get even more granular and dive into operations. So I can go in and I can look at specific operations. I can then send people out to actually take a look at what is happening and go, okay, the hiccup was here. Now how do I address that? This is information we can use. And when we think about promoting operational excellence, being able to be efficient in our production planning and operations execution, and being able to really drive SAP as an asset, so something that we really rely on as a valuable tool, this is where we start to really get that value. But in order to get there, we really have to focus on getting that real-time reporting in place. So here we can actually get into a little bit more in terms of being able to graph and chart and see these issues, and really start to produce some things that we can sink our teeth into. So rather than having to go through and create all these reports maybe manually in order to get them out onto the shop floor, we can actually start to use SAP to generate a lot of this for us, and that starts to ease the administrative burden so we can focus on what really matters from an operational perspective. All right, we must talk about master data, because none of this works if we don't have our master data rules in place. And I will not steal any thunder from the next session in the series. Sean's going to be talking about inventory and material optimization, but I just do want to talk for a moment about the importance. So our master data, anytime we think about master data, we should think about rules. It's the rules that the system is going to play by. It is the information that it is starting with in order to give us advice. And advice comes in the form of proposals for replenishment, planned orders, purchase requisitions, those kinds of things, as well as our exception messages. So if SAP is going to talk to us and really help us with our job, it needs to know what the right rules are. And those rules have to be in alignment with our behaviors. So we have a lot of rules that are specific to production planning, and we want to make sure that we are really focusing on getting those in place so that we get the benefit of having good outputs from MRP, being able to have meaningful information to support our capacity planning, and being able to make sure that we can then go in and finite schedule. So if we don't have production versions set up as an example, then it's really hard for us to know what our options are. And as we go into S/4HANA, we have opportunities with PPDS. Now that dependence on master data is even more worth the investment to get it right, because we've got many more tools that we can use in order to optimize the shop floor. And this is also important from a financial perspective, and being able to make sure that when we actually go in and execute, we are executing with the right information in mind. So in order to be able to get that flow end to end, master data is really critical. So here's a little bit more in terms of best practices to be able to bring this to the forefront. So having that data quality and validity, relevance, consistency, timeliness, and completeness. If we don't have those, there's a number of impacts that we're going to see. And really the biggest one, guys, is that we're going to stop believing what the system is telling us. It's going to become record and report. It's something we have to do rather than something that we use. And it's no longer valued as an asset in our process. So we want to make sure that we have that master data in place as a building block, a foundational building block, in order to be successful. Okay? We have to be able to measure in order to be able to manage. As the old adage says, we want to make sure that we really have that in place and it's working for us. As soon as people start to not believe the system, then that process integration breaks down and we no longer have that good flow of relevant information to promote flow of material. So let me bring this home for you. I want to show you a real life example. So in this case, this is the result of some exception messages we're getting. MRP is doing its job, and it's letting us know that we're behind and we actually need to reschedule in. So super important. It's saying, hey, you're in trouble. Not only should you reschedule this in, but here's the date that you should reschedule it into, and here's how much you need to reschedule in. But if we look, we're actually already over capacity in our plans. So it's showing up on the overload report. If we look at the graphical planning board, we haven't done a good job with that finite scheduling. Everything's just flowing through. So if you think about that picture with the speed bumps and the importance of the capacity planning process and being able to go in and evaluate and level, we haven't done that here. We're just letting it roll. And it's starting to really show up for us. And this is a live example out of a customer system. This is what it looks like when we aren't following those steps. And now in practice, we have to be doing those things. So we're not putting multiple orders onto the work center at the same time if it doesn't allow for that. But we can actually come in and dig into this a little bit more. And not only is that process maybe not where it should be, but we can actually see it's showing up in terms of deviation. So our target and our actual, look at that input-output diagram, and our candy cane graph, if we look at the white and red bars, they're just wildly off from one another. So this is a way we can quickly identify, hey, this process is out of control, and now there's an opportunity for us to really go in and start to fix it. And this is what it will look like when you are getting started. And the great thing is that then you will be able to have that benchmark to go through and maybe just take, one production line, one work center resource, and really work on focusing on improving the quality of the data, and then going through those speed bump processes to make sure that we have a plan that is reasonable and realistic and actionable, not an efficient baton pass. All right, so if you plan to fail, you are planning to fail. No one plans to fail. So we want to make sure that we are in a position that we have that plan in place. So we want to make sure that as we look at the process, that we are thinking about the what and the how. So how are we going to get this in place? And by doing that pre-planning, we are reducing the delays during the jobs. And then once we actually do the scheduling, we're reducing the delays between the jobs. So those handoffs, those turnovers, those changeovers are going a lot more smoothly for us. So it puts us in a much better position for success. And it's so important we're going to see it twice. Here we go. All right, and then lastly, we are going to close the loop with that real-time reporting and analytics. That's really where the value is going to come from in terms of being able to identify and understand our constraints in the process and be able to make those improvements. SAP becomes an asset for us when it is a single source of truth that promotes flow. And if we can focus on the production planning process, putting those speed bumps in place that allow us to have that plan that is reasonable, realistic, and actionable, that schedule that we are handing off for execution, and then being able to measure the effects afterwards and being able to then go in and address them, that's really where we start to drive value through the organization. This will really allow SAP to start to be the asset that we want it to be. So I think for now, we're going to turn it over to questions. Thank you so much, and let's go ahead and take some questions from the audience.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event. I didn't get a chance to say hi live this morning, but I do appreciate you being here. Excuse me. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to get their questions asked. We've had a couple that have come in through the Q&A, and so we're going to bring them up. But we do have Christy, and we also have Martin online today. So this is a fantastic chance for you to either ask questions that have come up since you saw the first session with Martin and I, or from Christy. Christy, thank you. Great job. It's interesting for me, former wholesale distribution guy, to see some of the stuff you're talking about and kind of think back to either, as the IT guy helping our procurement team look through some of those things and address some of the challenges. It was a fun trip down memory lane for me on some of that stuff. So thank you for that. So I don't know, Martin, if you and Christy want to certainly come online, you can come off mute. I know, Christy, you may still be in a place where that's difficult, but let me kind of jump in with the first question, and I'll throw this out for both of y'all. So Christy, you had talked about, some different ways to manage your planning, right? And so one of the questions came in, hey, look, we operate generally make to order, but we don't always get the orders from our customers, where we can manage our normal lead time. And so you end up in sort of this, I don't want to call it a hybrid model, but really kind of it doesn't really fit into any of those buckets that you described. And so how do you manage, whether you're talking about from planning data, from the master data on your products, to be able to execute your manufacturing process when you're maybe not coloring completely in the lines?
That's such a good question. I think it's tough. It's this alignment and negotiation between what the customer tolerance is and what sales will accept, and then how we are actually going to go out and execute from a manufacturing perspective. Because we all work in a world where we're trying to serve that customer's needs. And if we don't have sufficient time, we're going to hedge our bets and start to get that material in place. So what I would suggest is that there's a really good conversation around the level of risk that we're willing to take. And maybe we find ourselves in more of an assemble to order environment where we're in a place where we are poised to be able to react when that customer order comes in. We're getting sufficient lead time that it's allowing us to have the flexibility in order to deal with differences in customer needs or be able to redirect some of those commonly used components or semi-finished goods. But yeah, having those conversations and getting started there and then working through those planning strategy techniques will help us to get into a better place to be able to accommodate them. I know that's something a lot of us struggle with that. So that's definitely come feel.
Yeah, we, as kind of being in the middle of the supply chain as a wholesale distributor, we had a little set of different challenges. We weren't actually manufacturing anything. But, so us, the real challenge was being able to manage inventory levels and managing lead times, both inbound and outbound lead times. And that was, even within what I'll call it a narrower scope, it was still a lot of work to understand that and to see how disruptive, everything from, whatever, an issue with the plant where they couldn't manufacture something to, well, UPS, the order didn't go out in time from the plant on UPS, and so it came in a day late for us, and, kind of managing through that and trying to meet customer expectations, right? So that's going to come up as we talk in future sessions around this. But again, that's where the world that I lived in was how do we manage those lead times effectively. So another question that's interesting, and I've not really thought of this before, but it is something that actually is a big decision, right? So, the question we have here, the person is currently running in a repetitive environment. They're thinking about moving to discrete, and really they're trying to understand kind of, all right, maybe good and bad, or what are the risks that they're creating or maybe mitigating as they evaluate that. How do they make that decision?
Oh, it's such a huge decision. It really is two very different ways to operate. And I think one of the biggest rules when we think about how to approach how we work in SAP and as we think about how we go into manufacturing is we want to differentiate where it's really meaningful. So meaning if that data and that information, the ability to close a production or a process order and be able to see the variance to plan at the order level is really important to you, then discrete might be something that is worth pursuing. If you are able, you're running the same product, long runs all the time, you're able to capture that more from a time perspective, you're comfortable with just looking at it, more in time buckets at the end of the month, then it may not be as important to you to go in and do that additional work to be able to see what's happening. But, if we take off our SAP hats for a second and just think about it from a supply chain perspective, and really thinking about how it is that we enter and leave those manufacturing runs tells us a lot about whether we should be in a repetitive or discrete environment. But I think that's a very common conversation that we're having all the time, is trying to figure out whether it makes sense to make that leap or not. And I'd say it's oftentimes it has a ton of value in order to be able to have that additional visibility. But again, differentiating where it matters and where you can drive value from the information that you're gaining is key in making that decision.
So, and I love this question, another one from the audience. Because this is, if you have the answer to this, I think a lot of people really latch onto this for today. One of the challenges is helping the organization to focus on the quality of their transactional data. I know this is a huge challenge for us back in the day. Do you maybe have any suggestions or tips and tricks to help them either, escalate this as a priority, or how to maybe put guardrails around their process to be able to ensure a better quality of transactional data? Because ultimately, that's what drives your ultimate decision making on this.
Yeah, it's the starting point for everything else, right? We have all these calculations that are happening in the background, most of which are, very simple calculations, but they all start from, a place that we are in today. And so if we have outdated or lagging data, then that erodes our ability in order to be able to get a good plan and be able to use the system. But data is truly an asset, and it's a competitive advantage when we can get it right. The challenge is that when we're working in silos, it's very hard to prioritize this. So the more that you can use maybe your S&OE process, so couple steps down from sales and operations planning, but actually going through and taking a look at what's happening in those weekly buckets and, and how we're doing. And the more you can talk about it in your tier reviews on the floor, the importance of, tracking throughout the day and transitioning that information from, an MES system and shop floor control and making sure that's communicating back to SAP, the better off that we are. So people only value what they're using. So if they are in a position where SAP is just a record and report for them right now, then it's really hard to convince people to invest the time and energy. But if you can start small and work to win some hearts and minds, then that tends to amplify really quickly and start to show people that there is value from the time investment and sometimes the money investment in order to be able to get more real-time information and be able. So yeah, that's the use case is the convincing of folks that it's an asset and putting that asset to work in the way that we're making our decisions and we're driving the actions and activities.
Absolutely. It's amazing how prolific the challenges are around master data and transactional data. And that, I've never talked to a customer who doesn't list that as one of their problems. And I've talked to a lot of customers. I'm sure you have as well, right? And it's always on the list. And unfortunately, nobody ever has a really good answer for it, which is, again, is being kind of one of the challenges for just the fact I'm using technology, right? I have to document stuff. And as I tell people, any rules are harder than no rules, right? And so, having to follow the rules for managing my data is always harder than not doing it. So I want to ask you a question. This is actually from me, not from the audience, right? As I listen to you, I picked up a lot of great things for me. But if there was one thing you wanted to kind of, as you talked about the things today, if there was one kind of key point or sort of one most important point, what would you want the audience to take away? Hey, you're not going to remember anything but this. I want you to remember this one thing. What would that be?
For me, it's this. If you are doing these things offline right now and you believe that SAP cannot help you in your process, take away a little bit of the art of the possible today as inspiration. None of these things have to be done in huge sprints, and it's not all or nothing. You can start small and incrementally grow the value of the production planning process in SAP. So just don't hesitate or feel like you have to go and do a big thing in order to start seeing value return, and start focusing on some of the smaller changes to really show the value both to yourself and to the rest of your organization. I think a lot of times we think it has to be this big, huge project, or there's so much stuff that we have to do in order to be able to start to see that value. And I think you can start small and be in the driver's seat of being able to demonstrate some of those. That's the one thing I would hope people might take away today.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Hey, another great question from the audience. So what transaction is actually used to look at that schedule attainment graphic that you were showing?
So we have a couple of different ones that were featured in there. So MCPK and MCPU are two really good ones to go in and take a look at if you haven't had the chance to.
Fantastic. All right, hey, one more chance. I want to make sure that the audience, please, we want to make sure that you're leaving here with your questions answered. And while I really enjoy talking to Christy, and I could sit here and talk to her for the next hour, I want to make sure that we're covering things that are important to you as an attendee, right? You have a challenge that you're facing at your organization around, manufacturing, operational excellence, supply chain. How do I use my SAP tool more effectively? This is an opportunity to get those questions answered. So please, the only bad question is one that doesn't get asked at this point. Martin, I'm going to ask, are you out there today? I know we were talking earlier. I'm hoping you're still available.
Yes, David, I am.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. You're there. Thank you for that. Hey, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of chime in. Say, Chris, first off, thank you again for providing this content to your organization. I want to see if give you a chance to maybe kind of add sort of that higher level commentary around Christy's presentation today, and anything that you also want to maybe highlight that people should take away from today.
Yeah, I think, David, as you and I spoke when we initially set this discussion up last time, was people helping them realize that SAP actually can be considered an asset of the organization. I think that's a big part of what Christy was sharing too. There's so many tools, so many features and functions out there. nobody proclaims that SAP can do everything, but it can do pretty much most of the things you need. And if you're willing to take that leap and make the changes and actually see it as an asset and start utilizing it, maximize the use of it rather than underutilizing it, like you and I spoke, I think the opportunity is massive. And then to add to that, not only are you able to get schedule attainment, plan attainment, and all those beautiful reports that Christy was sharing between cost differences, etc., you also become a more agile supply chain. And you and I touched on that too, where agility is a far more important characteristic in a supply chain than a resilient one. A resilient one just kind of gets me back to where I was, when an agile supply chain allows me to actually adapt to the circumstances and actually maybe even benefit from it. And using SAP technology to do that is key. So I think it was a brilliant presentation showing some of the production stuff.
All right, hey, appreciate your comments, Mark. Now, looking at the clock, we're running up against time here, so I want to kind of start wrapping things up. Martin, Christy especially, thank you very much for your time today, for sharing and providing your thought leadership in this area, your expertise. Christy, a lot of great insights that people can tap in today. And thank you to the attendees for coming. This is available. You are able to consume this on demand. As a member of ASUG, you have access to this content through asug.com. Please check that out. Please take part in both the conversation that Martin and I had before. Again, that's available on demand. You can also connect to the additional content that we have coming up in this series around supply chain and managing your SAP asset. Look forward to talking to you in future events. If you have any questions about today, you will be receiving an after event survey an email. Please fill it out, provide us your feedback, and look forward to seeing you at future both online and in-person events. So with that said, again, thank you all today for your time, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.